We're joined by Ann Bernstein, who is the CDE's Executive Director. Ann, good evening to you and welcome. We are in a time of multiple, entangled and accelerating crises that significantly degrade our prospects, a polycrisis, as you term it. What actions or lack thereof tell you that the President's ability to lead us out and beyond them is questionable?
Well, good evening. I think it's really important that we have a thorough diagnosis of what is wrong in South Africa today. And there is a great deal that's wrong. If you look at around us, most things are worse than when the president took over 5 years ago. Of course, we've had the COVID situation, but a lot of these things are not related to that. So almost every area, from unemployment to water to energy to crime to investment, we're doing worse than we should be doing, and then we were doing quite a while ago. And you have to ask, why are we in such a terrible situation? Now, the president says it's the 9 wasted years of state capture and corruption, and conveniently ignores that he was the deputy president at the time and head of the deployment committee on cadre deployment. But it's much more than that. That's obviously one factor. It's much more than that. And I'm saying we've had a very bad strategy. We have had bad policies, bad ideas and bad policies, and really a failure to lead us to make the hard choices South Africa needs to take in order to get back on track.
I'm going to circle back to some of these bad ideas you're referring to, Ann, but what you're asking for in what you've shared with us just now is for the president to be deeply honest with himself and with the people around him, as you say, to look at not only what's been referred to in South Africa as the 9 wasted years, but also the years that he has been at the helm.
Exactly. I'm saying we've got to look at the last 5 years with clear eyes. And I think what you've seen is a president whose paramount strategy has been not to divide the ANC. Now, we don't know if he would, if he took bold decisions, but he's saying that that is more important than putting really competent people in his cabinet or firing people who openly defy him, many of whom are either incompetent or have been accused of in corruption scandals. So we see a strategy that says we know there are very bad people in the security cluster, and the president knew this because he got a report in 2018, but he didn't act on this. And even after the 2021 failed insurrection and his own panel report after that, have we seen anyone senior being charged or anybody senior subject to disciplinary action? We're just kind of moving on. So I think that strategy of ANC unity above the national interest has had devastating consequences for the country.
And, we've had a number of analysts on this issue because we've covered quite extensively the national conference of the ANC over December and then, of course, in the lead up to their January the 8th statement. And some have said, well, the president's got to appease some of the people around him, especially his detractors, so that he can stay in the seat because he's still the best bet for the country. How do you talk them out of that perspective?
Look, my view is, in a democracy, we elect our leaders to govern, and to govern is to choose. And if you keep giving us the same old people and the same old policies which are failing, then no wonder the country is doing so badly. A leader has to build a new consensus and has to develop the strategies and the policies that will deal with South Africa's challenges. Now, we have a very weak, corrupt and collapsing state. Local government is in a terrible state as well. But what is the plan? Where is the vision of how we move forward? I would argue that in a context where the state is so weak and unable to do very much, and is certainly not in a position to be a developmental state or to lead the country and the economy, you have to turn to what's working in South Africa. and we have a vibrant private sector and non-government sector. And we have to open up the space wholeheartedly and really understanding how to do that in a fulsome way to let those market forces help lead South Africa out of trouble.
Let's go a little bit deeper into some of these bad ideas that have been brought to the table, Anne, which have resulted in bad policies and failed strategies.
Well, a few of them are these. The first is cadre deployment. I think people should be appointed to senior positions in our modern, sophisticated economy who are fit for purpose. Instead, we have this policy of putting party loyalty above competence. So that's one. We need to get rid of that. Secondly, I'm arguing that we need a wholehearted understanding of how dynamic markets and entrepreneurs and new firms can really empower South Africans, drive investment, and create millions of new jobs, which we desperately need. I think we also have to say, what are the country's priorities? If you look at the government's economic reform and reconstruction strategy, if you listen to speeches, you see a laundry list of issues. We say we want more growth and investment, but then we simultaneously say we want expropriation without compensation, or we ratchet up the laws and regulations and red tape that companies have to deal with. So we're not an attractive place in which to invest. A very big mistake has been to think that state monopolies on the ports, on rail, on energy, on a whole lot of things can actually work. And even when they demonstrated that they're failing, that they drive up costs, they don't provide the services we need, they make doing business in this society very difficult, even then we don't see a full-blooded sort of change of direction to bring in the private sector and capital, which knows how to get these things moving again.
I know that in your writing you have, you've used the terms of, in the sense that, the president should no longer be referred to as a reformer. But everything that you're saying, kind of emboldens me to add a few other things. And let's see what you think about that. Is that effectively you're saying he's been ineffective, he is lukewarm, we're swimming in a pool of mediocrity, and all of that has got to end. Let me know if that's going a little bit too far. And then the question for most South Africans is, now what?
Well, I run a non-party political organization, but if you were sitting on Mars in outer space and looking at South Africa today, I think you would have to conclude that whoever is running this country is not doing a good job at all, many of whom don't know what they're doing. So I think I'm saying that business, leaders across the board, NGOs, the society as a whole needs to think differently about how we get out of trouble, and they need to think much more strategically, and that the notion of this president, this government, as a reforming government is just too weak. It's been a mirage. There have been some reforms, of course, very few implemented at glacial speed and just not bold enough. And I'm saying that to keep looking to this president, this government, to implement the dramatic reforms South Africa needs as we sit in the dark is a mirage. Time to rethink.
Time to rethink. Ann Bernstein, thank you as always for that analysis. Some would say the writing's been on the wall for quite a while now. It's about how, especially the voting public, begins to decipher that and make sense for themselves in the context of the realism of load shedding and other problems that we have in South African society. Thank you so much for your time.